High in the frozen mountains, where storms swallow the sky and silence cuts deeper than any blade, lived a widow who had lost everything. Her days were carved from grief, her nights filled with nothing but the sound of the wind against her lonely cabin. No one dared come near her, no one offered her comfort, and she had learned to survive in bitter solitude. But one stormy night, a knock echoed at her door, weak, desperate, and unlike anything she had heard before. When she opened it, she found a boy, no older than 16, starving, half dead, and abandoned by the world. She could have shut the door. She could have let the storm claim him. Instead, she pulled him inside, never imagining that this single act of mercy would change her life forever. For the boy she saved would not leave. He would grow stronger, closer, and make a decision so shocking, so unthinkable, that it would leave the mountain widow trembling to her very soul. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of love born where no one expected it, and a choice that stunned everyone who heard it. The mountains were merciless that winter. Snow blanketed the jagged peaks and choked the narrow trails, and the wind howled through the canyons like a grieving spirit. High on a lonely ridge, a single cabin clung to the side of the wilderness. It belonged to a woman the townsfolk called the Mountain Widow. Her name was Eliza. Her husband had perished 2 winters earlier in a logging accident, leaving her to survive with nothing but her axe, her fire, and a strength she hadn't known she carried. She rarely came down to town anymore, and when she did, her face was hidden beneath a shawl. People whispered about her, some with pity, some with unease, but no one truly knew the depth of her loneliness. One night, when the storm raged fiercest, Eliza heard a sound that did not belong to the mountain winds. It was faint at first, almost lost in the storm a-knocking. She froze, certain her mind was playing cruel tricks. But then it came again, louder, desperate. With a candle trembling in her hand, she opened her cabin door to find a boy slumped against the frame. He was thin, his cheeks sunken, his lips blue with cold. His clothes hung from him in tatters, and snow crusted his hair like frost on a dying branch. He looked up at her with hollow eyes. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "Food, shelter." Eliza's heart clenched. He couldn't have been more than 16. For a moment, she hesitated. The mountain taught her that every stranger carried danger. Outcasts, even killers, sometimes roamed these ridges. But one look at his trembling hands, and the way he fought to stay upright, tore through her suspicion. Without a word, she dragged him inside, shut the door against the storm, and laid him near the fire. She fed him broth from the pot, simmering on the hearth, spoon by spoon, until color crept faintly back into his face. He devoured it as if he hadn't tasted food in weeks. His hands shook so badly, he nearly dropped the bowl, and she steadied it for him. When he had eaten enough to keep him from collapsing, she gave him a blanket, dry clothes that once belonged to her late husband, and a bed of hay near the fire. For hours, she watched his chest rise and fall, steadying into the rhythm of life again. By morning, the boy's eyes had strength enough to hold hers. "Thank you," he murmured. His voice was soft, raw, but full of sincerity. She nodded, asking no questions, though hundreds burned in her mind. Who was he? Where had he come from? Why was he alone in such a deadly storm? The next days passed in silence. He spoke little, eating sparingly, sleeping long hours, his body clearly recovering from hunger and cold. Eliza chopped wood, tended the fire, cooked simple meals, and pretended not to notice how often his eyes followed her, as if he were studying the way she moved, the way she lived. Finally, on the 4th evening, he spoke. "My name is Caleb," he said quietly. "I was traveling with others, but they left me when I grew too weak. I've been wandering for days. Thought I'd die out there." Eliza listened, her face unreadable, but inside her chest a storm raged, abandoned, left to starve in the wild. She had known grief, but this kind of betrayal struck deeper than frostbite. She offered no pity in her words, only another bowl of soup and the warmth of silence. Days became weeks, and Caleb regained his strength. What surprised Eliza most was his willingness to work. Without being asked, he carried water from the frozen creek, split logs beside her, and repaired the leaks in her roof. He moved with the awkwardness of youth, but with a determination that made her pause. He was no longer just a boy she had rescued. He was becoming part of her survival. The widow, who had lived in silence for so long, found herself speaking again. At first, only short words: "Pass the knife, close the shutter." But then, As the fire warmed them in the evenings, stories spilled from her lips, tales of her husband, of the life they had once dreamed of in the mountains, of the bitter loneliness that had followed his death. Caleb listened intently, never mocking, never turning away. Sometimes, his eyes glistened as if her sorrow was his own. One night, as snow lashed against the cabin walls, Eliza asked the question she had avoided for too long. "Why didn't you go back down to town? Why stay here with me?" Caleb looked into the flames before answering. His voice carried a weight too heavy for his years. "I had nowhere else to go. The people I trusted left me. You didn't. You opened your door when no one else would. To me, you're all I have now." The words struck her harder than any winter wind. She felt something stir within her, a mixture of compassion, fear, and something unspoken she dared not name. For years, she had lived with emptiness. Now, this boy filled her cabin with a presence she had almost forgotten. But the mountains do not allow peace for long. Whispers from the town reached her ears when she ventured down for supplies. Rumors of a widow keeping a strange boy, of impropriety, of scandal. The look she received was sharp, judgmental, laced with poison. Eliza held her head high, but each word cut deep. She wondered if Caleb sensed it, if he too felt the shadow of suspicion looming over their small refuge. Still, Caleb remained. He rose before dawn, worked beside her, and sat across from her at night, as if he belonged there. And slowly, something unexplainable formed between them. Not just survival, not just gratitude, something deeper, something the world outside their cabin would never understand. Yet the day would come when Caleb's decision would shake everything. Eliza thought she knew. The boy she had sheltered, the boy she had saved, would make a choice that no one expected, and it would leave the mountain widow's heart trembling in ways she never imagined. Yet the day would come when Caleb's decision would shake everything Eliza thought she knew. The boy she had sheltered, the boy she had saved, would make a choice that no one expected, and it would leave the mountain widow's heart trembling in ways she never imagined. The snow had begun to melt when it happened. The thaw brought a fragile hope to the mountains. Streams trickled again, and birds sang faintly among the pines. For months, Eliza and Caleb had built a quiet rhythm, a life that seemed to belong to them alone. But as spring cracked open the icy grip of winter, the outside world crept closer, and with it came danger. One morning, 3 men rode up the ridge to Eliza's cabin. Their faces were hard, their coats dusted with travel. Bandits, she realized at once. She had seen the kind before, desperate, cruel, always hungry for whatever they could steal. Caleb was splitting wood outside when they arrived. One of the men sneered, pointing his pistol lazily at the boy. "Looks like the widow's taken in company," he said with a smirk. "A fine-looking lad. Betty works cheap." Eliza's blood turned cold, but before she could speak, Caleb stepped forward. His voice shook, but his eyes burned. "Leave her be. You want something, take it from me." The men laughed. One swung from his saddle and grabbed Caleb by the collar, but Eliza stormed forward, her axe raised high. Her shout cut through the air, raw and fierce, startling even the bandits. "Get off my land," she roared. For a moment, her grief and rage became fire in her veins. The men hesitated, then spat curses before turning their horses. They would not forget, but for now, they left. Caleb's chest heaved, his fists clenched. Eliza saw it then. The boy was not the same starving child who had once collapsed at her door. He was taller, stronger, carrying himself with a defiance that had not existed before. And in his eyes, she saw something else: devotion. Fierce, unshakable devotion to her. That night, silence hung heavy in the cabin. Caleb sat close to the fire, his face shadowed by the flames. At last, he spoke, his words careful, deliberate. "Eliza, they'll come back. Men like that, don't forget. You can't fight them alone." She tried to laugh off his worry, but the tremor in her chest betrayed her. "I've survived worse winters than them," she said. But Caleb shook his head. His voice deepened with a weight that startled her. "I won't let anyone hurt you, not while I'm here. You saved my life, Elisa. Now it's my turn to save yours." Her breath caught. Something in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at her, carried a meaning she had not dared to acknowledge. The days stretched on. Caleb refused to leave her side, working harder than ever, as if preparing for the return of those men. But there was more behind his determination. He lingered by her side at the hearth, his words gentler, his glances lingering too long. He had stopped being a boy in her eyes. He was becoming something else, someone standing tall, someone choosing her above the world he had lost. Eliza fought the storm inside her. The world would never understand. A widow, seasoned by years of hardship, and a boy barely stepping into manhood. The thought itself was enough to bring the town's scorn crashing down on them both. Yet every evening when she caught his eyes across the fire, she felt the walls she had built inside her slowly cracking. The moment came on a quiet spring evening. The air smelled of thawing earth and pine resin, and the fire burned low. Caleb set down the knife he had been whittling with and turned to her, his face pale but resolute. "Eliza," he said, voice steady though his hands trembled. "I've thought about this for months. I've turned it over in my head 100 times, and I can't keep it in anymore." Her heart raced, but she said nothing. He leaned forward, his eyes blazing with an intensity she had never seen in someone so young. "When I stumbled into your cabin, I was nothing but a dying boy. You gave me food, shelter, life, but you gave me more than that. You gave me purpose again. You gave me a home. You gave me you." Eliza's throat tightened. "Caleb," she whispered, but he pressed on. "I don't want to leave. I don't want to go back down to the world that abandoned me. I want to stay here with you, not as a burden, not as a stray you rescued. I want to stay as your husband. I want to call you my wife." The words fell like thunder inside the small cabin. Eliza's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her mind a storm of disbelief, fear, and something dangerously close to hope. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered. "The world will tear you apart for even thinking it. They'll tear us both apart. I don't care about the world." His voice cracked, raw with passion. "I care about you. I made my decision the moment you opened your door. I'll fight anyone, face anything, but I won't leave you, Eliza. Not now, not ever." Her hands trembled. For years she had carried only emptiness, only the weight of grief. And now, here before her, stood a boy who had turned into a man beneath her roof, offering her something she never thought she would feel again: love. Fierce and unshakable, tears stung her eyes. She turned away, ashamed of the emotions tearing through her heart. "Caleb, you don't understand what you're giving up." But he stepped closer, his hand brushing hers with reverence. "I do. I understand more than you think. I was abandoned, left to die. You were left alone, forced to survive. We are both broken, Eliza, but together, we can be whole again." The fire crackled, the mountain winds whispered at the door, and for the first time in years, Eliza allowed herself to hope. The world outside their cabin would never understand, but in that lonely place, bound by survival and by the raw honesty of their hearts, Caleb's decision was made. He would stay, and he would call her his wife, and that decision, thinkable to others, shook Eliza's world to its core. It was not just shocking, it was salvation. The days after Caleb's confession weighed heavy on Eliza's heart. She tried to carry on as before, cupping wood, tending the fire, cooking meals, but his words lingered in every corner of the cabin. "I want to stay as your husband. I want to call you my wife." At night she lay awake, staring at the timber beams above, her chest rising with silent battles. She feared the world's judgment, feared the whispers that already followed her when she ventured to town. But stronger than that, fear was the ache of loneliness she had endured for too long. Caleb's presence had broken that silence. He had stitched warmth back into her life. One morning, she found him outside, mending the fence line her husband had once built. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, his hands calloused from work. She stood in the doorway watching him, her breath catching. He was no longer the starving boy she had rescued. He was a man shaped by hardship, tempered by devotion. A man who had chosen her. "Caleb," she called softly. He turned, his face brightening at her voice. For a moment, she saw not the difference in their years, not the weight of the world outside, but only the truth between them. She stepped closer, her voice trembling but sure. "If you stay, if you truly mean what you said, then you must understand there is no turning back. This mountain will be your life, and I will be your wife." Caleb's eyes widened, then filled with tears he could not hide. He dropped the hammer, crossed the yard in 2 strides, and took her hands in his. "Then it's decided," he whispered. "From this day forward." That evening, as the sun bled gold across the peaks, they stood together on the ridge behind the cabin. The mountains bore witness, silent and eternal. There was no priest, no ring, no townsfolk to bless or condemn. Only two souls, scarred and battered by life, finding strength in each other. Caleb lifted her hand to his lips and spoke the words, with a steadiness that shook her heart. "I call you my wife." Tears blurred Eliza's vision as the wind wrapped around them. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt whole, not because the past had vanished, but because the future had been reborn. Word of their bond soon drifted to town. People whispered, some with disbelief, some with cruel laughter, but Eliza no longer cared. Caleb's decision had already given her more than the world ever could. He had given her loyalty, companionship, and a love forged not in youth's fleeting fire, but in the crucible of survival. And so, the mountain widow who had once opened her door to a starving boy, found her life changed forever by the very heart she had saved. His decision shocked everyone else, but to her, it was the miracle she never knew she needed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Make sure to subscribe to Legacy Ignited and turn on the bell so you never miss another story of love, loss, and hope. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life every day. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of this journey with us.